Okay. So I want to talk to you guys about shipping container homes and the general way that they are built. So I did a presentation step by step of like a way to build your shipping container home. Typically there's two types of shipping containers you can get. There's one trip only and as is. As is containers can be dangerous. They can have chemicals, they can have rust. So generally speaking, you don't want the as is containers. The best ones to get are the one trip only, and most are built one trip only. That are built are one trip only. A huge step in all this would be designing your plans and deciding if you want to stick to one shipping container. If you need more space, it's always a good idea to do two, just because they're very small and it can be hard to incorporate a lot of space into a very small container. So like I said, choosing to do two, how you want to connect the two, if you want to put them side by side or kind of differentiate them a little bit, can be a good idea based on several things, like if you want one room to be bigger or one room to be smaller, or just kind of want a general big space to hang out in or spend time in. What type of foundation you might want to use depends more on the ground area around you. Most people for shipping containers use the pier because it's just cost effective and they're kind of quick and easy to set up. Slab is obviously better if you live somewhere the ground isn't as stable, and strip is just kind of a step in the middle if you need a little more stability than the pier. If you want to connect your shipping container homes, like connect two or more, you can do this by welding, or you can use, like I saw a lot of them with that they built a middle space with just like kind of like a house in the middle, but just connecting them and making more space, and that can be good also for plumbing if you wanted to run more than one plumbing line. Most of them only have one, and then it runs it throughout the house. And then you need to cut your holes in your shipping container because obviously this is a big box. There's not much in it, so you need holes for like your door or your windows. So, and there is typically one plumbing line, like I said, that goes into the house, and then it's run either underneath stuff or through the framing, just to prevent extra heat loss due to going through the metal container. That's a huge escape for heat loss in these things. Obviously, another big thing is you want to strip out the flooring. Most people don't want the flooring in the original shipping container home because it's got damage done to it, either through water damage or it might have contained chemicals. You just don't really want to keep the same flooring in these houses. So the framing, you need to be careful when doing the framing in these homes, because if you screw into the metal, that can help you lose heat, and you really don't want to do that, especially if you're in this house is going to be located in a colder area. So you kind of want to screw into the flooring or into just other parts of the framing just to keep that heat from escaping later down the road. It can be really complicated to install insulation in a shipping container home because these walls are so thin and they don't really have a lot of room to put insulation in. Typically speaking, most people would want to do spray in insulation in these, but if you wanted to be more sustainable, you could use cotton or wool, or I've even seen some that did cork with it. So it's really up to you depending on what you want to do, but spray-in is the best known one to do. After you install your insulation, you can go ahead and add your windows and add your doors back. You just go ahead and set it up, and you can paint it, but a big factor in all this is making sure your shipping container won't rust. So preventing rust, you could do things like use just a paint that does not allow for rust, or using a special spray that prevents rust. And it is recommended that down the road at some point you do paint again with the rust-free paint, just so you're still trying to prevent it, and you don't, eventually they're going to rust if you don't take all precautionary measures to prevent that. Obviously you need to put up framing for bedrooms and things of that sort. Adding the plumbing, like I said, you can go through the framing. Typically these have one line, but if you do add the middle section, you can run lines up through that middle section floor. But the plumbing typically goes through the walls just to prevent heat loss from going up through the bottom of them. Obviously, you'll want electricity in your house, so you'll call out your electrician and get him to set up either a temporary line, or you can choose to set up with green power. That's kind of up to you. I did try to do a cost estimate for this. I gave my uncle, who's a contractor, a call, and I asked him what the initial price for just to set up with Duke Energy would be, and he says it's usually just the cost to come out and set up, drop a temporary line. And he didn't really give me a general price because he says he generally just factors that in with everything else. And then that's your price per kilowatt hour, which is $10. And then your solar panel, obviously you don't pay anything if they are installed on your house, but the initial cost can be between $30,000 and $60,000. So it can be a lot initially. So setting up solar panels might not be for everyone, but it is a possibility if you want to be more green, and typically people who build shipping containers, that's something that they would want to look into. Something you need to keep in mind when building a shipping container house is, after the framing, insulation, and sheetrock, you're looking at a building that was pretty thin to begin with, and now it's going to be even thinner, just because of all that space that everything took up, and especially, insulation can add a lot or it cannot add a lot depending on what you choose. So your shipping container, while you may buy it thinking, oh, this is plenty of space, it actually might be a lot smaller than you think. Oh, I feel like I'm missing a slide. But well, why might you want to build this? There's a lot of creative freedom to the design to the house, because obviously you get to pick everything that goes into this house, and the general shape of them creates a lot of room to build however you want. They're cheaper houses. The cost to build is around $10,000 to $35,000, which is a whole lot cheaper than your typical house. If you ever needed to move them, you can put them on a trailer, especially if they're smaller, and move them quite a bit simpler than regular houses. Some of the pros is they have a low price point compared to typical houses, and they can be faster to build. These take, depending on how much time you're looking at building, regular houses can take years, well, a year, depending on how great your contractor is, but these are pretty quick. Obviously, they're designed for buyers, so anything the buyer wants, they can have like room set up, or a setup in certain ways, or just have them really small, or have a really big room, or just have like a general just big space where it's all open. And they can be placed on trailers and be kind of like a tiny house-ish kind of thing, but that's less common for sure. They don't require as much land as traditional housing because obviously they're smaller, and they hold their value typically over time. They're, like I said, it can be really hard to install insulation on these. So a very common complaint you hear is that it's too cold and my insulation doesn't work as well. So that might be something you want to consider if you live in a really cold area. You might not want this type of house because of the lack of insulation can be really detrimental. They are typically smaller, so if you have like a 8-person household or more, you might not want this type of house. Not that it couldn't be built for you, it would be kind of a bigger mess to create, and it might just not work for your needs. So a lot of the shipping containers have chemicals in them that are not great for the environment. And these containers, just making them into shipping containers can be good, but sometimes they just, in general, are just continuing to buy shipping containers might not be the best idea. So they are environmentally friendly in the sense you recycle them, but they aren't if you get ones that are very chemically, like have a ton of chemicals transported in them. They can rust, and no one likes the look of a rusty house. So trying to get rid of that rust would be a big burden on some people. And they can tend to have structural issues just where the corners weigh down over time. And these are some different designs for shipping container homes. Oh, and this is an extra step. This moved, but you can design storage. You might want to design storage into them. Obviously, everyone knows about the staircase where you can put in just little areas underneath your stairs to add in extra storage. And then there's my citations.
Keep forgetting to unmute myself. Very good. So a couple of questions. Let me see if I can find that one where you mentioned it. Well, I don't see it right offhand, but you said something about middle space. What do you mean by middle space?
Okay, so in a lot of, I looked up a lot of videos of people like building these at home, like with their significant other or whatever, and they would build a little like wooden, like obviously like a regular house in the middle to connect the two halves of the shipping container homes. So they would have like a regular house in the center, and then it would connect the two shipping containers on the sides.
I got you. Okay, kind of like common ground, common room.
Yeah, like common ground.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what about, okay, so I see a lot of pictures where, we're seeing the, the exterior siding on it. So did you come across any that done a lot of exterior siding? I noticed this one had wood on the outside of it. But are there more choices for external stuff, or did you see most of them being, just the container exterior?
So I saw a lot more of just the container being the exterior, but I'm sure there are tons that you can do siding with. I would have more research on it and let you know.
Okay, cool. Just so you know, I don't know, you probably are not aware of it, but your audio is horrible. I mean, it's just, and it's a technical issue, I'm sure. So sometimes you kind of really kind of squabble out, but I think for the most part we were able to hear you. Did you find any issues with condensation?
I didn't find any specific information on that, no.
Okay, and the reason that I want to talk about that for just a second, I'm finding, dealing with this school bus, I'm finding that it's a whole different ball game than what I'm accustomed to. And my computer is running a little slow as well for some reason. I'm not rightly sure. So as soon as it comes up, we haven't really got to moisture in talking about that, but in a regular conventional house, we have a couple of things. We've got siding, we have our sheathing normally, and sometimes we have a thermal barrier there if we've done our good, build. We've got our stud cavity, and then generally we got interior finish, which could be gypboard and so forth. So what's going on in here is, we breathe, and when we're breathing out, we're breathing out moisture, and that can build up. We're boiling water, we're taking showers and all of this. Now let's, we're comfortably 70 degrees in here, and it's 38 degrees here outside currently. And so what happens is this air, is going out through here, and vapor is detrimental. And at some point, through here we have an imaginary line. At some point, this warm air that has moisture in it is going to drop dramatically down. And let me give you an example of that. So this is a psychometric chart, and this is how we determine at what point does water condensate. Now we know that in the summertime, we go outside with our sassafras tea, and we're sitting out on the veranda, and it's a nice warm day. It's got a lot of moisture in the air, and our glass is just dripping wet with condensation. So let me explain to you what's happening here. So like I said, the inside air is 70 degrees, and that's where this is. I'm reading a dry bulb down here. So, most of the time when we talk about the temperature, we're talking about dry bulb, not wet bulb. And then the outside temperature I said here is about, 38 degrees. So that's about right in there. Okay. So let's say, for instance, all right, so my relative humidity right now is 51%. And that's what these curved lines are. So there's 50%, and right there's 51. Okay. Now remember, it's 38 degrees outside. So and pretend like this is, pretend like this is the wall. Okay. This is inside. This is outside. And as this air, let me change colors here. As this air goes through the wall, when it gets to this point right here, that is your saturation line. In other words, all the moisture that you had on the inside of the wall here from taking a shower, baths, boiling water, breathing, so forth, is transferring through that wall. And when it reaches this temperature, which it just so happens to be 50 degrees, all of this moisture or all this vapor in the air here will condense. And it will condense on whatever that we have. If it's, if we're talking about the sheathing or the studs, it's going to condense to the studs. If it so happens to be right in through here, then our insulation is going to get wet. So that is always and forever going to happen, and that's why we talk about vapor barriers. Now let's look at this. Let's look at this metal thing going on here. So we got this piece of metal out here, and inside we may have a stud layer, and we had we were talking about blown in insulation, and that's fine. Or not blown in, but sprayed insulation, spray foam. All right, so we got our spray foam in there. And then we might have whatever finish we got in here. Gypboard, in a bus, can't exactly do gypboard. And you were talking about moving these containers after they were built. If you're planning on building it, don't use gypboard because it's going to crack. So now, instead of all of this woody stuff, okay, so wood has an R value of 1.25 per inch, and metal has almost zero. It's 0.03 if I remember correctly. So you were talking about, really painting the crap out of this stuff. And that is super, 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 super important, because now we've got this 70-degree weather and, it's 50. Where's that 50-degree line? It's almost always on that piece of metal, because metal is a conductor of energy, of heat. So it's gonna suck the living crap out of the heat in here. And when this moisture hits that right there, that's where it's gonna cling. And so, even in this bus, what you said, strip out the floor, absolutely. Instead of just, don't stop at just the floor, you need to strip out everything on this, to make sure that you get right down to the metal, find out what kind of rust you got going on there, and paint, and more paint on all this metal to protect it from rust, because that is going to be the biggest issue right there. Something you also said was when you are attaching your framing, you don't think about it much, but when you're doing that framing, and again, you got that really thin piece of metal, and you're trying to put some studs in here, and you go to screw those studs into the metal. So in this case, I'm going to put my screw on the outside and screw into it this way here. So you don't think about it much, but these are bridges. So what's going to happen is we got this nice, warm heat in here, and this heat is going to get sucked out the end of those things. Now you think, well, we're talking about the end of the screw, which is literally probably about that big. All right. So, but the thing about it is, I love talking about this and using this analogy. Let me find, I want to find a specific image right quick for you. So, in one part of this movie, this old guy here is in the bar, and they have a big container full of wheat, looks like. And so he pulls out one piece of wheat and it hits this guy on the head. And he said, does this hurt? No, it doesn't hurt. But then he pulls the cork out of it, and all the wheat goes flying out and just desecrates him. So, you know, when we're talking about these screws, generally there's a lot of screws in there. And when you think about it, you know, you got one screw, but then you got multiple screws throughout the entire wall, and you can kind of get a picture of what's happened. All of those screws are trying to suck the heat out of that thing. So it is very important. And one of the things that I'm finding out with doing this bus is I don't do these. I don't screw in it at all. What I am doing is I'm using glue, and I'm gluing all my panels, all of my studs, everything to the walls, and then I'm attaching to the wood. That way I don't have that bridge so that I can lose that heat out through that wall. Does that make sense? Anybody else got some questions for Maegen right offhand?
I've followed container homes for quite a while. I remember when I first discovered it, probably over a decade ago, it was quite fascinating. But then, God, the industry taking off and they're building hotels and everything else. But one thing that I've noticed common is, you know, when they first came out with that spray stuff, I don't know if it was foam or for bed liners, probably 20 years ago, a lot of guys that had trucks would have this sprayed in sort of plastic bed liner. I think they're using a similar material to spray on the outside to insure against rust. I think that's rather common now. I don't know what it's called, but they first started doing it in bed liners. I think it's the same stuff they're using for container homes.
I find the rust issue kind of interesting. I've seen people who do actually appreciate the rust aesthetic, and because shipping containers are made out of core 10 steel, which is designed to rust to a certain amount and then never rust anymore, you can actually even bury a container in direct contact with earth, let it rust, and know that it's never going to be compromised completely. It'll still remain watertight.
So it kind of patinas.
Yeah. Core 10 was, that's one of the aspects of the design. They know it's going to be out in salt water. It's going to experience a lot of issues. And one of the things they did was just go ahead and design it to rust to a certain degree. It's not always what you want in a home, certainly. And not everybody appreciates that look, but if you like that rusty patina, you can go with it and know that it's still not going to rust all the way through your wall.
When you're saying core 10, is that the number 10 or TIN?
10, the number 10. Core 10 is the rating for the steel for the shipping containers.
Gotcha. Anybody else? Very good.
I
did think one thing that she might not have mentioned as a con is obviously, like with some of the other construction, you got to consider the expense of a crane because, well, flatbed to haul it and a crane to lift it. So that's an expensive cost just to get it situated.
And, mentioned briefly, but really extremely important is that there's only some certain ways that you're going to be allowed to use these with building codes. You got to really maintain that awareness. You can't just plop one of these down on a slab and then build a house on top of it. They won't rate it as a foundation.
I've found out that if in most cases when you're doing some kind of odd building, if you help educate the inspector, he appreciates that. And a lot of times he'll work with you. You know, once in a great moon, you're going to get that one inspector that's just hardcore, balls to the walls, by the book, no, you know, but really, now, like for instance, in Morganton, Mike Crotts is the building inspector here. And he is, oh my God, he is so impossible sometimes. But you know, basically, if I wanted to build this here, and you know, I go to him and I show him the plans and everything, and he's going to say, well, this is not in the code, but I'm going to tell you what. And matter of fact, he sent me something. I had a question the other day. A student had asked me, and I want to just share exactly what he said verbatim. Somebody had asked me, can red heads be used in place of J-bolts for the foundation? And, you know, he said, no, according to the code, it can't. But if you get me a signed, sealed drawing from an engineer, you can do it. So, you know, that's what, you know, he would say about something like this. It's not in the code book, but if you get, you know, if you get an engineer who's a lot smarter than he is that says it will withstand, then he'll accept it. And I think that's the case in most places. I know Asheville, they're pretty hard on contractors. It seems like, you know, that you got to have 3 sets of plans submitted. You got to have, you know, it takes 2 to 3 months to get the plans approved, and maybe that's just the number of builds that's going on in there. But here in Morganton, I submit one. I don't even have to submit an entire plan. All I got to submit is a floor plan and a wall section, and he's got a pre-printed wall section, you know, where I can go through and just write stuff in and of what the material is going to be. And I actually drew that for him. And so, you know, that's all that's needed here. So it really depends on the building inspector, for sure. Any more questions?
Yeah, what was the term you said at the beginning of this that they wouldn't allow, but I didn't hear the word?
The as-is containers, is that what you're talking about?
No, what Eric just said when he started that last dialogue, I didn't hear the word he used for attachment or whatever. That the code wouldn't allow. I didn't hear you.
Eric was talking about redheads on foundations.
Oh, yeah.
What are redheads? I don't know that term.
It is a very big TAPCon. Do you know what a TAPCon is?
Yeah, I've used those. I know what a TAPCon is.
Okay, well, it's just a big, it's a, you know, it's just an oversized, oversized TAPCon, really.
So you have to use that explosive gun like a firecracker?
No. So redhead, we call it redhead. It's really, it's either a wedge anchor or it's a screw anchor. And you can use these in conjunction with epoxy. So you can basically, you got to drill a hole and you got to pop these down in there. And like this one here, for instance, when you tighten onto the stud that you're, or whatever you're fastening to, then this pulls up and spreads this out, and it connects to the concrete. These can slip if the hole is made too large. This will pull completely out. So, you know, with a J bolt, you pour concrete, you put your bolt down into it, and it's a done deal. There's not a whole lot of science behind using the J bolt, but with these, there is more error. There's more room for error, and they are not allowed in the code book. But if you have an engineer's signature, then you can use this. These type of screw-ins, again, they're made by the Redhead company, and if I'm not mistaken, I think Redhead and TAPCon are one and the same. And so these type of bolts here, if you ever go into a tunnel, not necessarily the tunnel at Tunnel Road, but some of the larger tunnels up in Pennsylvania and other parts of the country, your sealing material is held in place with these type of bolts. Basically, They drill a hole that's much bigger than this. They squirt it full of epoxy and then screw this into it. And once that epoxy sets up, you couldn't pull that, you'd pull the concrete down before you ever pulled that epoxy out. It's just, it's just the way it is. So that's a redhead.
Okay. They use Tapcons, a larger diameter, in manufacturing for anchoring conveyors and equipment, because I remember having to get them out and put them in.
Yeah.
So what are the ones called where you fired in with that gun that you, like a firecracker thing, you
Powder actuated.
say that again?
Powder actuated.
Yeah, that's a loud gun too when it goes off.
Powder actuated tools like that.
Yeah, I had to use that before.
Yeah. So these are again, they're kind of iffy. The building code doesn't like using these because of the way that they're put in. So again, it's kind of a crapshoot whether these are going to hold really good or not. And you're technically supposed to be certified to use this. Now, you can go down to Lowe's, Home Depot right now, and you can buy one of these things, and you can buy loads 1 through 4. There are 8 loads in this. If I put a number 8 in it and I tried to shoot through a 12-inch concrete wall, I'm probably going to end up killing my neighbor because it's going to go through the wall and about 2 or 3, 5 miles away. It's got a lot of power in it. It's like going from a 22, if you're familiar with guns, it's like going from a 22 to a 12 gauge high power slug. I mean, it will kick the piss out of you. And so to be certified in this, you see how many different manufacturers they are. So you can't just get certified in a powder actuated tool. You got to be certified for a Ramset master shot by Ramset, or a DeWalt, or a Hilti. So you have to be certified by the manufacturer for their specific guns, and so it's kind of like I say, it's kind of a crapshoot. Okay, any more questions for Maegen? All right.